see where you were trying to go with the question.
Yeah.
Trying to free up, and that's for good, but I think she's got to fix it.
And then, didn't the offer just work? I forgot.
So there's two.
Yep, the tape's on.
We got an interim.
Okay, thank you, councillors. There's
I'm also looking for
quorum in the room.
Yeah, Wilson Avenue.
So, Councillor McCarthy, the point at which we got to... thank you. If I can get everyone focused back and sitting in their seats, we'll start again. And apologies for that slight delay for all those members of the gallery. Councillor McCarthy, the point we got to was that Councillor Surf had proposed an amendment, which is those words at the end of point 4. They had been accepted by the seconder, Councillor Amir. Will you accept those words?
I will accept those words. Thank
Okay, they now become the motion. Yes, Councillor Surf.
Councillor Rennie. Mayor Rennie, I have another amendment. Before I do that, could I move a procedural motion to extend the meeting by half an hour?
Yes,
We still got 20 minutes, but I'd just like to be on the safe side.
so moved. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy, thank you. All those in favour? That motion is carried.
And I also have another amendment which forms
Just so we're clear, that's until 10:30.
10:30, yep. Another point to add to the motion, and it reads, request that the Minister for Planning and Building take all the necessary steps required, including both in the planning and building relevant planning and building legislation, to prevent the demolition of 31 to 33 Comus Grove, Thornbury.
If I could get you to read that out slowly or pass it over so that we can make sure the
I
correct
kind of
words
changed
get
it a
up.
little bit.
Okay.
Request that the Minister for Planning and Building take all the necessary steps required, including both in the relevant planning and building
You're voting for my amendment. Fantastic.
legislation
I support that amendment.
to prevent the demolition
I'm laughing.
of 31 to 33 Comus Grove, Thornbury.
And so
You all agree?
I had a suggestion that we add immediately take all the necessary steps. So are you happy to add the word
Immediately.
Immediately take all the necessary
Where are
steps.
we putting that? Take all necessary
Request
steps.
that the Minister for Planning and Building immediately take all the necessary steps.
Happy for that.
Okay. Councillor McCarthy, as the mover of the motion, do you accept that amendment?
I do accept that amendment.
Is the seconder happy to accept? Yes, so that now is our motion. Councillor Messina?
I have an amendment to that motion.
Yes, Councillor Messina?
Item number 6 authorises the CEO to allocate up to $150,000 in the 1920 budget to undertake the planning scheme amendment and heritage assessment work.
Okay, that has not been accepted by the mover and the seconder.
So,
Well, it hasn't been accepted by the seconder, so on the grounds that that hasn't been accepted, is there a seconder for that, for Councillor Messina's motion? Happy to second it. Amendment. Okay. So that's been moved as an amendment by Councillor Messina, seconded by Councillor Williams. We're just making sure we get the words up on screen. So, Councillor Messina. Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
I have a question on the figure of 150,000.
And you're asking where that figure came from? Yeah, I've got a second. Where are we, Joy?
I'm asking through you, Mayor, that there's a discrepancy on a figure I can't quote in here
Okay.
and that figure, and
So I'll seek
the
clarification.
basis of that figure is...
Okay, I'll seek clarification from the officers. I'll simply ask the question, what amount of money would be required? Thank you.
So through you, Mayor Rennie, to do this work in addition to the existing strategic work program, we would need a total of 150,000, which would include some expert advice and also additional officer time to be able to do the current workload and the additional work. Certainly the advice we've previously given councillors was about accommodating the officer time within the existing team.
There's a plus and a
Yep.
minus.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Councillor Messina, we'll debate that, Councillor
No.
Williams? You've
Ask-
seconded for the purposes of
Yeah, I
debate.
do. But can I ask a question too?
Sure.
Through you? What amount do we have in the surplus? Because I think this could make a difference.
I'll ask the CEO to respond to that.
So I think the surplus at the end of the financial year was about $13 million. In fact, it would be, if this amendment was to be supported, I feel very confident, having worked in this area, this specialty, for many years, I feel fairly confident. Projects sort of finish up and down, and so I feel fairly confident that this could be accommodated almost all over the course of a 12-month period through savings in other areas rather than affecting the surplus. My understanding is that the intent of the amendment, though, is to make it clear that if council was to do this work, it wouldn't be at the expense of its strategic work plan, which was put forward through the council budget. So the intent of this is to make sure that it is completely funded and not at the expense of a couple of other projects that officers have indicated would be slowed down in order to accommodate it.
Just a further question. So those projects are the one that we had been working on for nearly 9 years? Because I wouldn't like to hold that off any further.
Of course, it's up to council in any year to so what council does at the beginning of the financial year, as you know, is set a strategic work plan. The work plan is based on three factors primarily. One is the need for the work, so the urgency for the work. The second is the budget allocated, and then the third is the resourcing. So as councillors know, just having money allocated doesn't necessarily we will be successful in achieving the outcomes council and the community are looking for if we don't also have the resources, because a lot of these projects are deceptively time consuming from a staff perspective. So we try very, very hard to be open and transparent about that, and I've always been really I've really admired council's approach to being very considered in that regard. So on the 1st of July this year, council started a new, financial year, started a new work plan for the year. It's got a set number of projects. Adding in a new project that wasn't contemplated as part of the budget either has two impacts. One is it'll cause overtly a delay unless we top up the funding and the resourcing, so it'll have a sort of unintended consequence. What we're trying to do by providing advice is to be overt about the impact of that, so council has all of the information. To what we try to do in considering matters like this, it's highly unusual and the circumstances are very specific. What we always try to do is to try to pick a like-for-like project so that it's far easier to do it in a construction or a project delivery sense. If council wanted to deliver a different playground, we'd say pick a playground that was in the work plan. What we've tried to do in providing advice to council is if you pursue this work then and don't provide additional funding, which is what 6 proposes, if you do it without additional funding, then it'll happen at the expense of like projects, such as the one that you referred to, which has had a long gestation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm keen to debate this amendment that we have. Is your question required in order for us to debate the amendment that Councillor Messina has put up?
It's a procedural question about whether the amendment can be allowed in the chamber.
I will ask the CEO that. So is it an allowable amendment? Is that because it relates to the allocation of funds?
Because this chamber's already considered $150,000 for additional heritage study, interim heritage study work in Thornbury, and rejected it in April.
Thank you. I think the context was different, but I'll ask the CEO to clarify.
In order to support the spirit of the amendment, Councillor Lawrence, perhaps it might be clearer then, if I could suggest, Mayor, that the proposal be amended to remove the words "in the 1920 budget," And perhaps you could substitute, so that it read, authorises the CEO to allocate an additional, up to an additional $150,000 to undertake the planning scheme amendment. For this work. Yeah. So that would then clarify that it's not in contradiction of the budget resolution if that provided some greater certainty. Yeah.
Can I suggest to the mover and seconder that we just do that? We just take out in the 2019-20 budget of the amendment. So that the amendment was Councillor Messina's. Are you happy to take out the?
Yes, I am.
Yep, and Councillor Williams, you seconded that? Yes, sorry. So authorises the CEO to allocate up to an additional $150,000. Thank you. So we're now going to debate the amendment. Councillor Lawrence,
Speak in favour of the amendment.
okay, well, we haven't had the mover and seconder, so that would be the first thing we would do, would be hear from the mover and the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. First of all, thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for your notice of motion. My concern with this particular motion in its original format was that it was taking away funds from projects that have been part of our council plan and previous council plans as well. And there is two particular projects that have been waiting, one I think for a number of, since 2006, and the other one's been waiting for another 9 years. So I didn't want to delay those projects, and what effectively, without naming what those projects are in the report, but what item number 6 actually effectively does is say, we'll continue those particular projects, and what the resources allocated are is to include this in this particular this basic assessment work, so that those other two projects can still be undertaken, which was my major concern, that those two other projects would be further delayed. It wouldn't align with our council plan. In other words, we wouldn't actually have had them come through at the end of our 4-year term, and they weren't done in the previous council term either, when there was the other council were in place. So that is a concern for me, when the two particular projects have been delayed because another project was taking its place. And what this item 6 effectively will say is that we can actually undertake this plus the other major works as well.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Williams.
Pardon me. I was making the suggestion that we need to look at Darebin as a whole. This has been outdated, where my fellow councillor, Councillor Tim Lawrence, has brought it to council several times, that we need to look at this as a whole. We have many areas in Darebin that desperately need that heritage overlay. There's especially areas that have been missed in the previous report, and there are huge gaps throughout Darebin. We have old 100-year-old Californian bungalows, beautiful homes, beautiful estates that are getting demolished on a daily basis. We need to protect them. We seriously need to do something about it. The fact that I've asked the question, we have money in the surplus.
But we are just speaking to the amendment, Councillor Williams.
I am.
Okay.
That we got money in the surplus, so we can do it, and it's not going to affect the other projects. I can't see why this shouldn't go ahead. It's a win-win for everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I welcome Councillor Messina's excellent addition to this amendment, and for the very same reasons that I moved the amendment in April for an additional $150,000 to address heritage issues outside of our existing area, because, well, I did live in that area for 22 years, and I know the council has failed to move forward with protecting 1920s buildings. So my amendment that was rejected in the budget process would have allowed more, but of course my concern still remains with Oak Hill. It remains with isolated streets around Edward Street, between Leamington Street and Edward Street, where there are both 1920s Californian bungalows, and we also have a rare example of actually 1950s bungalows that are copies of 1920s. And again, people value them and are trying to renovate them and protect them. So while we've had technical arguments here, I think all councillors here understand the value of that 1920s architecture. It is in fact the first affordable housing project, I think, in Victoria. It was a mass construction of a government construction through low mortgages through the State Bank, and was in Coburg and Thornbury. So it is of great significant social history. It is being used presently. But there is this issue of the demolition and of displacing other work that's important, which Councillor Messina has pointed out. So I'm delighted we're moving this direction. Of course, obviously, in my ward, I went today and I'm still seeing houses that are going to be
10
destroyed
seconds.
in the next few weeks of the same heritage.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers to the amendment? There being none, I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried.
Could I just question, was there an abstain vote there? Or?
People have abstained and that is the case, so the motion is carried.
Can I have my objection noted, please?
Yes, we'll note Councillor Newton's vote against that amendment.
Can I
So this is now the substantive.
question the ruling? Mayor, my understanding was that abstain means negative. No, does it mean positive?
No, it means that it was clearly carried. So we'll move on. It has been suggested that the item number 5 is missing a word.
The motion was.
Can I also get clarification what abstain means? Because I have always been under the understanding that a person abstains because they haven't received further information, but clearly means it's a no vote.
Well, I will seek clarification from the governance team. I clearly read that as the motion being passed.
Yeah, that's why I don't abstain much, because it's actually not neutral. It's actually a no.
There was 4.
Through you, Mayor. So the local law, this local law, council's local law, doesn't specifically reference abstaining. I've just conferred with my colleague. My view is that in the absence of a definition, abstaining means not voting. So you're not voting because you have the opportunity to vote in favour or against or not vote. I don't, I've seen it previously and it's always been recorded as not voting. So abstain from voting.
Thank you. So we'll keep moving. We'll get the motion back up on the screen. Thank you. It's been suggested that we're missing a word from item 5. I don't want to do it as another amendment. Can I just suggest that there should be the word via in front of both in point 5? So request that the Minister for Planning and Building immediately take all the necessary steps required, including via both the planning and building legislation. Unless anyone objects, I'll just take that as accepted. Yep. So, yep, that's fine. So we're back to the debate on this motion. We've heard from the mover, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor O'Meara reserved her right to speak, so I'm seeking further speakers.
Question.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Just a question, Mayor Rennie, through you to the CEO, who is the planning guru here. Well, out of us, I'd say so, clearly. We now have a motion. Point 4 now seems to conflict with point 6.
Point 4 suggests that we are able to reassess this at a later date. So I don't think that's a conflict.
So are we doing the heritage study on it? I'm just kind of thinking of what happens in the street sort of thing. Or are we kind of still umming and ahhing?
To you, Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you for the, through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question, Councillor Lawrence. My reading would be that, so in order to progress interim controls, Council will need to do quite a bit more work in order to, sort of justify that request to the Minister. So that's the allocation of the funding. In the event that we don't go any further, it might be that we don't need all of the money. But this would be to progress the work for the intent of the interim controls and then potentially conversion to the permanent if that was required. So I don't think they are contradictory. But I understand what it is that you're asking and why.
Do you? I've got a second supplementary question just on that.
Yes, Councillor Lyons.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, to the CEO, could council at that point consider taking that $150,000 and trying to protect some of these other 1920 buildings in Preston, Reservoir and Region?
Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question, Councillor Lawrence. Can I just clarify that what you intended was that in the event that the Minister doesn't have an appetite for applying interim controls and then Council said don't proceed with the permanent controls, could we then divert that money and that effort to another precinct? That would be the subject of another Council decision, but it would be open for Council to consider that, yes.
Thank you. So let's get on with the debate on this item. Are there other councillors who wish to speak to the motion? No, there being none, I'll put it to the vote.
Yeah, substantive.
Yeah, we're at the substantive motion.
Yes.
You wish to speak?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Lyons.
Mayor Rennie, look, it is unfortunate this has come through this process because I think it throws into doubt our actual budget processes, and it also, again, puts us in the spotlight that we've failed to tackle heritage in this city, including the criticisms we've had in terms of the protection of Preston Market. And that's from the person we're trying to persuade here. But the reason I think I can now support this is that the actual 1920s built heritage across Darebin has been neglected for too long. So we've been caught out. The residents have sent a change.org petition, which really points out that we haven't done enough assertive work on precinct planning. Luckily, there is some work done. I mean, I'm surprised, and I was asking when this is done because it's been a theme of mine, and previously I had a conflict, so I couldn't debate this issue. But it's good that we've started on that process. But there are buildings I saw today in Reservoir, in Central Reservoir, that are unprotected in any way and will disappear in the next few months too. So one of our problems in this point is that we're trying to convince someone to take action who's criticised our tardiness on heritage. But that's why we actually really need to commit this 150 and recommit some more to roll around the city so that we're responding to the architecture that exists here and not just responding to change.org surveys.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I have to agree with Councillor Lawrence has said, but it's clear for me that the item was included to finish off two particular projects. So that's why I've made the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 11, reports of standing committees. There are none. Item 12, records of assemblies of councillors. Assemblies of councillors held. Moved by Councillor Amir, seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. Reports by mayors and councillors. Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Lassurf. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. Consideration of reports considered confidential.
I'd like to move a motion that we close the meeting to the public.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf, seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Members of the gallery, thank you very much for your attendance tonight. and for sticking with us until this hour. The meeting is now moving into a confidential phase, and I'll ask, therefore, that you leave. Thanks, Keith.